Hey guys, it's Kelsey, your best friend on the homestead from roughandtumblefarmhouse.com, and today I'm going to take you through everything you need to know how to make your own homemade fermented hot sauce. Surprisingly, homemade hot sauce is actually really easy to make. You probably already have everything you need in your own kitchen. So this recipe came from, or roughly this recipe, this format, it came from the book Fiery Fermentation by the Shockies. They have a lot of really great books that I highly recommend checking out if you're interested in fermentation at all. They're a really great beginner-friendly resource, lots of good pictures, lots of easy things to follow. So the recipe I'm going to share with you today, it's more of a foundation that you can use to work from depending on what sort of peppers you have available and your own taste and everything. So it's not something you're going to follow to the letter, but it's something that's going to get you, hopefully, the result you want in the end. So to begin with, for this recipe, of course, you're going to need hot peppers. You're going to need 3.5 pounds of hot peppers for this recipe. And for me, I use just a mix of everything I was able to get. It was kind of the end of the season. My friends had a bunch of peppers that were just going to get, annihilated by the frost. And so I just gathered up what I could and hauled it home. So for this recipe, I used a mix of poblanos, Anaheims, jalapenos, I think a couple of chili peppers, and then one or two just kind of mystery hotties that I'm not really sure what they were, but they were spicy when I cut them and licked them, so I threw them in the batch. I will link to the blog post below where you can find more information about what sort of peppers kind of fall into what category, because you have some hot peppers that are kind of melt your face off, ghost pepper type things. And then you also have peppers that are kind of more middle of the road, like a jalapeno sort of a thing. And then you have ones that are a lot more mild, like a poblano, or not even spicy, but maybe have some good flavor, just like a classic sort of red pepper or a green pepper. So check out the link below to get kind of a quick cheat sheet as to what sort of peppers you might want to add into your mix. Now we are using hot peppers, so it's important to be careful and a little cautious with handling hot peppers. I know some people that handle hot peppers a lot, they just go for it barehanded, but I highly recommend using some sort of a glove to use this process, just because those oils get even under your fingernails. I one time helped a friend. We were seeding peppers, which was, that's even kind of next level. So kind of like scraping it with your fingers, and the undersides of my fingernails burned for I think like 3 or 4 days before they finally stopped kind of tingling and hurting. So please wear gloves to protect your fingers from the oils. If you're the sort of person who you touch your face a lot, you may even want to put on like some goggles or glasses or something, so that way you don't get any of that hot pepper stuff in your eyes. Even if you have the gloves on, you can still transfer it to other places on your body. So just be cautious about that. The first thing we want to do is process our peppers. The great thing I like about this recipe is it doesn't call for a lot of processing of the peppers. You don't have to seed them or anything like that. All you have to do is wash them up, chop off the stems, and then you are going to chop the peppers kind of small, because then we're going to toss them in a food processor or a blender. My food processor is currently out of action, so I just use my blender. So it took a couple of batches of blending this up. And as I blend it, you can do it as you blend it or as you kind of mash it into a jar. I recommend doing it as you blend it. You're going to want to add in the salt. So to 3.5 pounds of peppers, you want to add in about 1.5 tablespoons up to 2 tablespoons of salt. And you want that really incorporated in there. The salt will help start to break down even more even though you've literally ground this up, the salt kind of helps it to start making it, pulls the juices out of there. So it's going to make it easier to get your mash nice and juicy the way you want it to be for a ferment. After you blended up your peppers, then you're going to put them into jars. So this amount of peppers would call for a 1/2 gallon mason jar. Once you have it all in there, just kind of smush it as best as you can to try and make sure everything is covered with a nice layer of liquid. Like a lot of ferments will require you to put a weight in there or something. We're not going to be having to put a weight in there for this ferment, but we are going to be capping it completely. We're not going to allow there to be like air to escape. We're going to deal with that in a little bit. So cap it, and then we're going to set the jar somewhere out of direct sunlight for 2 to 3 weeks is roughly how long it's going to take for it to fully ferment. So as with any fermentation, you will notice that it's going to start to have bubbles happening. As it does so, it's going to unfortunately separate that air, but the carbon dioxide rising is going to pull all that pepper mash to the top, and the liquid's going to be on the bottom, and that's no good. So you're going to have to take your jar. I recommend when you do this, it's kind of a daily thing you're going to have to do, is open the jar to let the gases escape, close it, shake it up a little bit, and then open it again to let anything else that kind of came out of that escape as well. So that is kind of a daily maintenance thing. Once this thing really gets fermenting, you are going to have to, it's called burp your jars every day to let those gases out. And there is a surprising amount of CO2 that comes out of there. And the video, you'll see that it's kind of an unfamiliar countertop. If you watch my channel at all, that's because I actually brought these things with on a weekend trip somewhere because I couldn't bring myself to ask my farm sitters, hey, could you come in the house also and burp my pepper ferments, please? I couldn't do it. So I had to bring them with me on a family vacation. So kind of keep that in mind when you're timing out when you're going to start your ferment, is that you have to release the gases from the jars. So about 3 weeks, give it a little shake and let the gases out. As the fermentation continues along, it's not going to separate out as much, but you still want to keep an eye on it. You don't want that big separation like you're going to see in the beginning. After a while, you will notice that there is no more gas kind of building up in there. There's no more separation happening. Fermentation is now complete. You can leave it sit as long as you want to, but once that has kind of wrapped up, you can definitely strain it and bottle it. So I just used a bowl, a sort of a mesh screen, and then put a cheesecloth over top of that. And then I just poured the whole mash into that. So as it strains through, it's kind of a thing from cheese making that I've done before, where you're going to kind of gather up the sides and squeeze and sort of wring out that pepper mash. You can just let it hang if you want, but I was a little bit kind of, let's move this thing along. So I was squeezing out the juices. Again, I would recommend wearing gloves for this process, depending on the level of heat for your peppers. My mix, it's spicy, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of more on the mild side. So I was fine to just go ahead and use my hands just to squeeze it out. And then I just washed up really, really well after. Now, do not get rid of that sort of discarded, like the pulp, the peppery pulp. Don't get rid of that. We're going to set that aside, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Back straight to the hot sauce. So we have strained it into the bowl, and now what I really recommend is, this is getting to the part where we're going to flavor it. If you want, you can use it straight the way it is, not a problem. But if you want to flavor it, I really recommend pouring this out into a few different jars so you can experiment with what sort of flavors you like. A good starting point would be to just go and find a hot sauce that you really like. Take a look at the ingredients and try and copy it as best you can, and just try and experiment a little bit. A good base to start with is some apple cider vinegar. Depending on how much, how small you separate out your batches, or if you leave kind of the whole big batch, you're going to want to do either start with a few tablespoons or anywhere up to a half or a fourth of a cup. You're going to want to add some apple cider vinegar. You could also do citrus juices like orange or lemon juice or lime juice you can put in there. You can do other sauces like adding in a soy sauce. There's all sorts of different things you can do. So I have, again, a link to the blog post below where I really go into detail of all the different kind of options you could use. For mine here, I just use apple cider vinegar, sugar, just white sugar. You can use brown sugar though. I used some garlic powder and some onion powder, and that's kind of all I went for my sauce. After that, I put it into some swing top bottles. You can get actual hot sauce bottles that have just a little opening on top. If you want, for shaking it out on food, I'll link to those below as well. You can get those off of Amazon, but I just have these swing top bottles around, so I went with these. And then you just cap them and stick them in your fridge. Now, one thing I'll recommend is that you do check on them when you put them in the fridge. If there's any fermentation left that needs to happen, it's going to really slow that down. But I would still recommend, when you open it up the first time, open it up after a few days and cover it with a cloth to open it, because I can't imagine anything more catastrophic than opening a bottle up and having it kind of like spritz out at you like a champagne. Would be no good. So take it out, cover it with a cloth, and open it just in case there's any fermentation that was still happening in there and is now built up inside those bottles. So just be cautious about that. You will also notice that there's a fair amount of separation that's happened. Just make sure you shake your bottles up really well before you use them, and you should be good to go. Now, a little bit of troubleshooting. When you are fermenting the peppers, you might notice something called calm yeast. Some people pronounce it cam yeast. I always heard it as calm yeast, where it's sort of like a white film that's on top. It's not like fuzzy or weird colors. It's just kind of a white, thin film. And that's not anything you really want to be concerned about. When your ferment is done, you can just kind of scoop that out, or if you're noticing it happening partway through fermentation, you can scoop that out and discard it and then shake everything up. You're not going to get all of it out, but it is a perfectly harmless yeast and not something you need to be concerned about. And just look up KAHM, calm yeast, if you just kind of want to see what a picture of that looks like, to give yourself kind of a peace of mind. If you do see any other sort of funky stuff in there, pinks, blues, white fuzzy stuff, then that's something to be more cautious with. I would say if it's just like a little spot, an isolated spot somewhere, scoop it out and kind of scoop out the area around it, discard it, and then just watch close and see. And if you have any more sort of reoccurrences, that might be a batch that you just want to throw out. Another thing to cover in troubleshooting is bitterness. This batch ended up a little more bitter than I would have liked it to, and so I mean it's still good for putting on stuff. But so some things that you can help with bitterness is make sure you're definitely using ripe peppers. Underripe peppers are going to have a lot more bitterness to them. Some different varieties of pepper just are more bitter by nature, so that's something else to look out for. You can also take the seeds out. They are going to up the bitter level a little bit, so if you're noticing you're getting a more bitter sauce than you'd like, it's going to be more time consuming, but you can scrape the seeds out and just process the actual pepper, body of the pepper itself. And lastly, as a way to potentially remove some of the bitterness, is I was reading on some different forums and things where you can actually kind of cook your sauce on like a very low simmer, your hot sauce, with a carrot, and that the carrot is going to extract some of that bitterness. I don't understand the science behind it, but apparently it's a thing that actually works. Though of course, if you're cooking it, you are losing those sort of fermented benefits that you're getting from the hot sauce otherwise that you are getting because it is a fermented product. So just keep that in mind, but those are some things that can help with bitterness. Right now we're going to rewind and go back to that pepper mash that we strained, and squeezed out. So that, don't throw it away. You can if you want to. If you don't want to deal with it, just compost it or toss it or whatever. But what you can do is, I'll show you here, is I just put a piece of parchment paper on a cookie sheet and then use a spatula and spread it out on there, and I just let it air dry. And then I don't have it included here in the video because I ran out of time. But after it has dried thoroughly, you can let it air dry. You can pop it in your oven. If you have a very, just kind of a keep warm type setting to dehydrate it, put it in a food dehydrator and get it so it's kind of a brittle sort of a thing. And then you can put it back in your blender or food processor and turn it into a really delicious hot pepper powder that you can use for chilies or tacos or whatever you want. It really still has a lot of great flavor left to offer. So it's something you definitely don't want to waste. And then that you can just stick in a jar and store like you would any other dehydrated product. Okay, I think that just about sums up everything that you would need to know. I'll link to some other great fermented videos here. If you're interested in fermentation, I have a lot of great sort of beginner-friendly recipes you can check out. Let me know if you have any stellar hot sauce recipes or recommendations below in the comments. It's always so fun as our little community grows to get resources and recipes from each other. So please leave them in the comments. I'd love to read them. Otherwise, we will see you here next week at our Rough and Tumble farmhouse.